Thank you for coming tonight. I have a very short minute and a half book trailer that I made. I want to start by asking, I know about you two, and I know about Virginia. Do you ladies know, are you familiar with the Murphys from living here? Okay, so you know who they are. This is a little book trailer I made for YouTube. There's nothing on here that you probably don't already know, but we'll just run it. And then I'm going to read a little bit from the book, just like 5 or 6 minutes, and then I will take your questions. Okay, as you already moved to Paris and were part of the Lost Generation. They eventually built a house there called Villa America. But before they built Villa America, they were staying at the Hotel du Cap in Antibes. And that's when their life on the Riviera really took hold, and other members of the Lost Generation, including Pablo Picasso, Hemingway, Gertrude Stein, the whole cast of characters, began joining them on a tiny little beach called Lago Roupe. And the scene I'm about to read you takes place while they're still staying at Hotel du Cap, but they have established this daily routine on the beach. Look at you, so lovely and brown. Rue was rubbing banana oil onto my back, bare in my new wool bathing suit. Isn't it funny, I said, until this year, sun-brown skin was considered a sign of poverty. Back in East Hampton, we'd gone bathing in heavy cotton midi dresses, covered nearly head to foot, and we always carried parasols to keep our skin soft and white. But now, suddenly bronze skin was modern, young, and free, a way to show off your short flapper shift or set off your eyes. We coined a new term for it, sunbathing. I heard that Coco Chanel just docked in Cannes on the Duke of Westminster's yacht, Jenny said. She was very dark in her black tank suit and wore a matching turban. Isn't she just the tiger's spots? There you are, I said. I flipped my opera-length pearls down my back and started to slather oil on my arms. I'd begun wearing them that way so I wouldn't get a white line on my décolletage while sunning my front. I also remembered how chic Lady Hedford had looked when she wore her pearls down her back in London. Now people seem to credit me with a new beach elegance. The sun is good for them, I claimed, but secretly it was my nod to the way I felt about our spontaneous gatherings. Every day was a party. Luxe, calme et volupté. How often had I thought of that phrase and silently congratulated myself on manifesting the magic of Baudelaire's poem. It was now even the title of a painting by Picasso's most worthy rival, Matisse. It became our code for those soft, luxurious days. Whenever someone would point out a beautiful vista or say something particularly poetic, excuse me, we would hold aloft one finger and say, Luxe, calme et volupté. Even the children had acquired the habit. Now Pablo said it, and he was looking at me. I'd spread out a pink damask tablecloth with mismatched china surrounding a vase of fresh poppies. In the center, I placed a straw-covered Chianti bottle around which I had twisted a garland of ivy. Tu es toujours si festive, ma Sara, he said approvingly. After lunch, I found myself in my favorite spot, propped on an elbow and reclining under the umbrella. Gerald called this Sara en repose. And there he was, Pablo's elbow inches from mine. Between the warm sun, my exposed limbs, and the delicious breeze licking my hair, I always felt more aware of my body at the beach, especially in Pablo's muscular presence. He wasn't one to perform for others, but if you listened to the things he casually muttered, it was very entertaining. Now, watching the children engrossed in building a sandcastle, he sighed. It takes a very long time to become young, he said. You couldn't be more right about that. I feel 20 years younger now than when I was single. I brushed some hair off my face. The key is to find your gift and then give it away. You do that every day. That's why you're so happy. What a lovely compliment, Pablo. I'd be lying if I said that my feelings toward Picasso were purely platonic. Those black bullet hole eyes, that brown compact body. There was something so primitive and masculine about the very energy that surrounded him, as well as a mischievous, puckish quality. He'd developed a new hobby of capturing people from the rear with his Kodak camera whenever they bent down to pick something up. He'd already acquired quite a collection of derrieres. I tried not to compare that feeling to the flat mood that had seeped into the bedroom I shared with my husband. But our growing affection also felt safe. Gerald was right there, cavorting about the beach in his swim briefs, a knitted sailor's cap to protect his receding hairline. And there was Olga, with her pretty bow mouth and predictable bourgeois conversation. Everything just felt warm and relaxed and seductive. I felt entirely comfortable sitting with my bathing suit straps off my shoulders, my pearls draped down my back. If there was a male compliment or two, what was the harm in that? A week or so later, Gerald and I were driving back to the Hotel du Cap in our rented blue Renault. Pablo had invited us to his studio, a supreme compliment, to see some of his latest work. We'd walked into the small, sunny room with its high windows facing north and south. It was astonishing how prolific the man had been, considering he spent most days with us at the beach. Clearly he kept late hours. A rumpled daybed sat at an angle in a corner. Perhaps he spent some nights there. An easel stood in the center of the room, and against all four walls were propped works in progress, oils, watercolors, sketches. While Gerald had been painting productively all year, his method was to outline, to plan, to transfer, to execute. It was a long labor. Pablo, on the other hand, just expelled creativity in every medium, seemingly without much thought. It was as if he didn't create with his mind, but channeled some greater power onto the canvas. Voila, he said, and propped a painting onto the easel. I'm entering a new period. He followed it with several others. If he hadn't been standing there, I'd have thought they were done by a completely different artist. Far from his cubist work, these were realistic and romantic, all done in the classical manner of Greek vase painting. And a recurring theme quickly emerged. There was a portrait of a woman in a white linen dress, her arms crossed and her hair in a loose twist. Another of the same woman holding a child on her lap. There were several ink drawings of a female reclining on a beach, one with a scarf tied as a turban. They all had upturned noses and slightly almond-shaped eyes, like mine. Most wore long strings of pearls and were naked. Another series depicted several nude women, 3 modern graces, that were clearly Rue and Ginny Carpenter and me. Gerald was uncharacteristically quiet, so I jumped into the pause. Well, I guess we should be flattered. Pablo's face fell. You're displeased? Of course not at all. I just didn't realize you were capturing us all this time. Capturing. I did feel captured. I just wasn't sure how I felt about it yet. There were others, too, figures that evoked Gerald and the de Beaumonts and Olga. But I had clearly become something of a muse. When Gerald finally spoke, his voice was full of awe. I'm speechless with admiration, man. The way you can pivot from one style to the next and master each new form. You never cease to amaze me. He made a little bow of supplication, and Pablo smiled. Now, as we pulled up to the hotel in our motor car, I reached for Gerald's arm. You're not upset, not even a little? Why would I be upset? You've just been rendered for posterity by likely the most gifted artist of our time. I'm proud, and you should be too. I scanned Gerald's profile for sincerity in his expression, his voice. Even the nudes? A pause. Did you pose nude? Gerald was looking at me now. Of course not. That I would do such a thing without telling Gerald. Unthinkable. Well, he has a good imagination then. Anyway, let's be happy about it. He patted my thigh. I was so relieved, because now I realized that it did feel like a slight infidelity to see myself on those canvases, as if Pablo had correctly read my unspoken attraction to him. We parked in the circular drive, and Gerald turned off the ignition. There's no doubt, though, that the man is in love with you. Well, I am going to open it up to questions, and I will tell you that at most readings, including readings with a larger audience, there's always an awkward pause for the first question, and then once someone raises their hand the first time, everybody else has questions. So whoever raises their hand first will have the undying affection and admiration of the rest of us. Who would like to start? The book starts, there's a prologue that starts at the end of Sarah's life. And then the first chapter is when she's 21, and she's not met Gerald yet, and they're living in New York. And then she meets Gerald here in East Hampton, and the book carries her 70 more years and ends at the end of her life. So it covers almost the full arc of her life. And so it's based in East Hampton, in Paris and Antibes for the most part. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, and apologies if you've heard this story before, because this question comes up in one form or another, and this is my answer. When I was a sophomore in college, I'd been studying dance. I developed a knee injury, and I had to very quickly change my major. And I took an English class thinking I might want to be an English major. And my first class was a book on the lost generation, focusing on those writers, mostly Hemingway, Fitzgerald, Gertrude Stein, everybody who's in the book. And on the syllabus as optional reading was the first biography, the Tompkins biography, Living Well is the Best Revenge. And I read that book, and I was 20 years old, and I don't know, something, they hooked themselves into my head and my heart. And I never stopped thinking about Sarah and Gerald. So, of course, when the Amanda Vale biography came out, which is much more extensive, I read that whole book. And at the time, I never envisioned myself as writing fiction or a book of any kind. Then I read The Paris Wife by Paula McLain. And I don't know if you've read it. If you haven't, you should. She read A Movable Feast, which is Hemingway's memoir about his early years in Paris with his wife Hadley. And when she read it, she felt like that woman, his wife Hadley, has more to say. And so she wrote a novel from Hadley's perspective about that period that stuck to the historical record, but imagined the emotional story, the conversations that we didn't hear. And when I read that book, I thought I could do something like that with the Murphys. It was The Paris Wife. The Paris Wife. Oh, that's The Paris Wife, yeah. Based on A Movable Feast by Hemingway. And then another novel came out, I think it was 2011, called Villa America, about the Murphys. And I read that book and I thought, well, now I don't have to write that book. But I read it, and in my recollection, she took their story in a completely fictional direction and made the book about something that didn't actually happen in their lives. And I thought, well, their lives were so magical and so inspiring. I mean, the golden period that they're known for is only the first half of their lives. So much happened after that, and they weathered so much tragedy and challenges, and their whole crowd, most of them died tragically. And I thought, that's the kind of book I want to write about the Murphys. And because all the biographies are about the two of them as a couple, and they're generally perceived as a couple, I wanted to write it focusing on Sara and from the first person perspective. And I thought that that would distinguish it from the biographies, because there's no way I could compete with Vail's biography. I mean, she's covered it. She's done it really well. And I had a lot of imposter syndrome about it too, because I admire these people so much. I thought, who am I, a relatively inexperienced writer, to write the story of these people that I love so much? But I had a funny serendipitous encounter with Paula McLain, who wrote The Paris Wife, when I was at the Kauai Writers Conference. And I went to the conference just to meet her, because I admired her so much from that book. And she was sick for the first half of the conference, and I was so disappointed that I was not going to get to meet her. And then word came around that she was coming for the second half of the conference, and I was riding the elevator down from my room to the pool, and there I was in the elevator alone with Paula McLain. And so I just had to talk to her about it, and I said, you know, my worst fear is that you're writing this book. And she assured me that she wasn't. And of course she knew all about the Murphys, and she thought it was great, and she encouraged me to do it. And I just sort of felt like, well, I guess I'm going to be the one to write this book. Nobody else has written this particular book about them. And I've loved them for 50 years, and I'm just going to do the best job I can. Well, I came to East Hampton 4 years ago just to see their graves, and I was hoping to see where the dunes had been. I knew already that it had been torn down. I went to Wiborg Beach just to get the vibe and to just kind of, I guess, kind of ask permission. I don't know. I just wanted to start from a place of inspiration. And the main point of that trip was going to be going to the Benedict Library at Yale to visit their collection. And a few days before I left, I called to say I'm coming, and they said, oh, you know, COVID was just opening up. And they said, we're closed to everyone but Yale affiliates. And I could not talk them into it. So I did not, but fortunately most of the collection is digitized. Other than that, Amanda Vail's biography was probably the most helpful because she really spells the whole timeline out. The other biographies about them, and there are several, and online, and their letters. Their letters was how I kind of got a feel for their voices, and a lot of their actual correspondence or things they are remembered to have said is woven into the dialogue of this book. Some at the Beinecke, some in a collection by Linda Patterson, I think her name is, called Letters from the Lost Generation. There are a lot there, and the Vail biography has some as well. Yeah, I mean, in the beginning, it was really, again, like I said, I felt kind of unworthy to take on this project of these people that I had loved for so long. But I think the more I worked on it, and I would send up a little prayer saying, you know, if you want me to do this right, you know, please help me with this. And eventually I just started feeling like I was getting her voice. And one thing in the book that is completely imagined on my part is the part about faith, that she has some really terrible things happen to her after this golden period. And I mean, the biographies talk about some of her reactions. One thing that doesn't really come up is faith, and Gerald Murphy was very against the Catholic Church. He'd been raised with, kind of a cruel experience with the Catholic Church, and he was really adamant about that. Sara's family was Episcopalian, but they weren't churchgoers. They weren't, they didn't preach faith at all. But I thought, if this were me, and this was definitely when I just merged my own experience into Sara's, I thought these are the questions I would be having. Why, when we have done everything right, we have been such good people, we have been such good parents, we have done everything to create this beautiful life, why is this happening to us? And is there a God? Is there a punitive God? Is there, trying to make sense of it? And I fully admit those were my own feelings as a mother of this is how I would be feeling. And so there was some projection in there. One thing I'm learning when I do readings, and especially meeting with book groups, a lot of people are really obsessed with what is fact and what is fiction. It says on the front of the book, this is a novel. This is not a biography. It's based heavily on their biographies. But I say, all the people in this book are real. The timeline is real. The places are real. What comes from my imagination is the conversations and the feelings and things like her questions about faith. That comes from me as a writer. But I've had some book groups say, well, it's perfect, but I think there should be footnotes so you can tell us what's real and what's not real. And I said, this is a novel. I'm not going to put footnotes in a novel. Or another woman said, I think you should put in italics the things that are fictionalized, and then in Roman, the things that are fact, so we know. And I said, no, it's a work of fiction based on real life people. And there is an author's note at the back explaining, my sources. And once people read that, they seem to be down about it. But this was something about biographical historical fiction that I wasn't prepared for those questions. It's like, go ask Paula McLain. Yeah. I don't know if there were any surprises. There were some revelations. She had so many men fall in love with her. Picasso, Hemingway, Fitzgerald were all in love with her in their own ways. And I came to understand that was because she was so authentic. And back then, that was not necessarily how most women behaved. She was surrounded by flappers, and, Zelda Fitzgerald was fascinating in her own right, but she was, she wasn't solid to the ground. She was very flighty and very, a very different kind of person. And I think I just came to respect Sara in particular, but both of them, for being who they were back then and being such good friends, even when their friends betrayed them or disappointed them. They stuck to their values, and they, of all these people, in my view, they had the happiest ending because they were stable and they were, they lived their lives every day as they wanted to. Yes, the money didn't hurt. The money didn't hurt. But they were so generous with it. Not only generous to their friends, they supported a lot of these artists. They supported Hemingway. And at the end of his life, in A Movable Feast, when quite honestly, I feel he was mentally ill by the time he wrote that book. You know, he had had 2 plane crashes in 48 hours at the end of his life. He'd had a lot of alcoholism. He had generational mental illness, a lot of suicides in his family. He was not a well man by the time he wrote that book, and he completely turned on them. Despite their many, I mean, they supported him financially, they supported him artistically, they supported him emotionally. You know, they stayed true to who they were. Yeah. And later, beyond their own friendships, when Hollywood Blacklist came and just, you know, the House Un-American Activities, they were very generous supporting their friends in Hollywood who weren't able to work, like Dashiell Hammett, Lillian Hellman. They really were people of, you know, they were good progressive people. I admired. Ooh, good question. They had household staff. They had a cook. They had, you know, a nanny. All the teacher that they hired. They had a gardener. They had, you know, a caretaker. They had a lot of people. But Sara was also very hands-on. You know, she would plan menus. She had a kitchen garden. Her meals were very simple. I don't know if she cooked during that time. She definitely created the menus, and her menus were, you know, things like baby new potatoes tossed in butter and dill, and an omelet or fried eggs with tomatoes and garlic on the side. I mean, I'm sure she did fancier things too, but they were very just what's delicious. You know, it was really farm to table, way in advance of the trend. Oh, you're gonna, I don't want to, you have to read the book. I will say that Honoria grew up and was an actress for a while, and she had a family of her own. I'm not going to go into too much detail about the boys. She had 3 children. I want you to read the book and find out. Yeah, yeah. It's 70 years from the time she was 20 to the time she died. Yeah. Yeah. And I've just recorded the audiobook. Okay. I am not reading it. I hired a really good actress to do it. And her voice has to age 70 years over the course of the book, which is really challenging. Plus, she has all these accents, and she has Picasso and Hemingway. She has all these voices she has to do. And at the end of the recording session, which was about like 20 hours, we had to go back and do some corrections in the front of the book, and we listened to it, and it was like a different person was reading it. Like her voice had really changed over the span. Well, I've uploaded it to Audible, and it was supposed to be up by last week, and they still haven't posted it, so stay tuned. It's already on Spotify. But it should be on all the platforms. I don't know. I'm going to have to call Audible when I get back. Yeah, but it's coming soon. That's a good question. I don't remember if there was actually a scene in history where they went and visited his studio. I knew, as I'm sure you do, that he had done those paintings and those drawings of Sara. And I may have thought, you know, what was that conversation like? Yeah, yeah. I mean, when I would read the biography or the letters or, you know, some other piece, I would be aware of, you know, when you're writing a novel, you talk about the beats of a novel, like what are the important events to put in and what is going to be a scene. And I just knew I wanted that to be a scene. And there's kind of some foreshadowing in that scene of things that will come later. And I also wondered, how did Gerald feel about it? you know. So the conversation between her and Gerald is completely fictitious. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, a lot of it was, how would I feel in that situation? What would, knowing Sara from the distance that I know her, what would make sense in her head? Yeah, it was an interesting exercise. I was working with a writing group for the writing of this whole book, and for the first, I want to say 2 or 3 drafts, the main comment I got from my writing group was, is this a biography or is this a novel? Because I was still so fearful. I was so in awe of them that I didn't have the nerve yet to depart from what I already knew was true. And I knew I had to get over that if I was going to make this a novel. And then at some point, I just started feeling like I have to, you know, I have to give this my best shot, and I have to make it something different. You know, Amanda Vale has written the biography. I'm not going to compete with that. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. It's been a real pleasure writing the book and meeting with people who, except for the whole fact versus fiction thing, which I just, you know, I don't blame them. I think I have the same questions when I read a historical novel. But I think that's why we read historical fiction, is because I wanted to be there with these people. I wanted to be on that beach. I wanted to be under that linden tree. I just wanted so much to be a fly on the wall. And this was my way of experiencing that. I wasn't aware that he owned a house there. I thought they usually... Aliscure. Yeah. Well, all I know is that Picasso's studio was in Juan-les-Pins, but I made up the street. Yeah, I just envisioned that. Another thing is, I seem to recall that Sara never actually drove a car. Virginia, you might know that. No. I thought I read somewhere that she... Yeah, yeah. I thought that I read somewhere that she never drove, but there were scenes that I had to put her in a car. I had to give her that mobility and independence. And at the end of, toward the end of their lives, when Gerald gets sick, you know, I needed her to be in a car. So there were times when I absolutely took liberties to make the story work. But I really, really tried to get to the emotional truth of how I thought she might have felt based on my 50 years of adoring her. So appreciate your good questions, and that you're as interested in the Murphys as I am. I think you're so, I mean, coming here, I just think this place is so special and so full of so much artistic history. And they were such a magical part of that. Yeah. You live here as well? In town? Oh, okay. Okay. What about you? Oh, you do? Okay. I was just at the Pollock-Krasner Museum today. Yeah. Well, wasn't her sister Hoyty from that? Wasn't she named for that family? Yeah. Well, her sister was, I think her middle name was Hoyt, and they called her Hoyty. And she does not fare well in this book. Oh, yeah. You know, one of the challenges of writing this book was I wanted to get them to Paris as quickly as I could. But I felt like I really needed to set the stage with the privileged background that Sara came from to understand what she gave up. I mean, she still had money. She was very privileged in that way, but she really made a conscious decision to leave the social status of the Wiborgs here. And when I was driving up yesterday on the Parkway, is it? And it took me, 2 hours to get here or whatever. And I thought, when they would travel from Manhattan by horse and carriage, it must have been maybe even an overnight. I mean, it must have taken them so long to get there. And then I guess they would stay all summer because maybe there was a train. Maybe they took the train. Oh, so they could have taken the train. Yeah, well, there was no traffic, but still, and even when there were cars, the cars didn't go much faster than the horse and buggy. So I just imagine for all the luxury they had, it was still, an ordeal to get out here. Yeah, and, to build a place and to have food brought in and all of those things. So it's a tragedy that house isn't still there. But you remember that? The dunes? I don't. It was in the 40s. Oh, the hoot, the petite hoot, maybe. Yeah. Well, no, they had it demolished. It was too expensive. It was, no. There was a huge conflict between Hoyte and Sara about the house because Hoyte had done some weird real estate dealings with it, sold it to Sara, and then claimed that Sara, she had just loaned her the money and she wanted the house back. And so there were lawsuits over it. And Sara finally got the house. But, it was the Depression and they couldn't sell it, they couldn't rent it. And the taxes and the upkeep were just prohibitive. And so they had to tear it down. But some of the outbuildings, Glenn was telling me, I drove out there yesterday and I found the sign. Yeah, I couldn't tell exactly which house was which, but I saw some that looked like they might have been the old outbuildings. I couldn't find that. Okay. Yeah, they'd had an Italianate sunken garden. You can go on Google Images and see all of these things. Do a search. Well, thank you for your enthusiasm and your interest.